Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to part 2 of our Medieval China Introduction Slideshow. Our next topic is going to be titled Advances under the Tang and Song Dynasties. In this section, we're going to learn how the Tang and Song dynasties brought advancements in technology and growth to Chinese culture. A lot like the Romans had, China created an empire. And it was an imperial state where ruling over much land and many different people meant creating an elaborate and structured government. They had to break this government, break the land into different provinces, or what we would think of as states, to help rule over so many different people and languages. To do this, Tang rulers created an imperial state using a bureaucracy. A bureaucracy is when a government is divided into different departments to help manage and run it. By breaking the government into these different departments, with secretaries or ministers ruling over them, ruling over each section of the empire, the emperor could have more control over large numbers of people and land. So, for example, a bureaucracy is like the idea that you might have a department for tax collection, right? And there'd be a minister or a secretary that's in control of collecting taxes throughout this empire. There would be a department over the military, a department over public works projects, a lot like in our government today, which is very bureaucratic on every level of government. You have departments that help run the functions of government. The bureaucracy was controlled by government servants that were called scholar officials. And they were called scholar officials because they were scholars, they were highly educated, and they were officials, like government officials who worked for the government. These jobs were held by people from the upper classes or people who came from rich families because they could afford the education necessary to pass these state exams. These civil service state exams were incredibly difficult and required a person to have years of education to pass them. So a person coming from a farming community or farming family did not have the adequate preparation to become a government servant. So many of these government bureaucrats and scholar officials were from powerful, rich families. Under the Tang dynasty and eventually the Song dynasty as well, there were many advancements in China that helped improve their economy. Better transportation with the help of canals and road building helped trade grow and allowed people and products to move faster across the empire. Advances in agriculture created more food supply. So there are actually more food means a larger population. You can sustain more people with a larger food supply. And Tang and Song rulers introduced paper money, which was pretty new at that time. Most of the world currencies were coins, which were heavy and kind of hard to use. Paper money made it much easier for people to exchange currency with each other. Chinese also developed improvements in communication as well. Paper making, woodblock printing, and even movable type were advances that allowed the imperial government to rule better, but also allowed for the development of literature and poetry. So these advances in communication tools and technologies allowed more people to become educated, communication to flow better, and ultimately people to have more access to ideas. Because the economy was growing, people began to focus on the arts. Landscape painting, poetry, and pottery took huge leaps and advances during this time. Porcelain, which is a hard white ceramic, is a Chinese style of pottery that is really well known all over the world. And today, a lot of things are made out of porcelain, which include toilets and sinks. It's a real hard white ceramic. The Chinese also invented several things during this time. The magnetic compass. This device allowed sea voyages to be faster and safer. The Chinese also cultivated tea leaves, which became one of the most popular drinks in the world. And the Chinese invented gunpowder. They used it for fireworks, but as we're going to find out, Europeans would eventually use it to develop gun and cannon technology. So 2 chunk questions at the end of this section. How did the Chinese economy grow during the Tang dynasty? And what are some key Chinese inventions from the Tang and Song dynasties? Okay, the last topic we're going to look at is the Mongol Empire. And in this section, we're going to learn how nomadic people from northern Asia called Mongols invaded and ruled over China for nearly 300 years. The Mongols were nomadic people in northern Asia. They had no government, but they existed in small clans and small tribes. They were a culture of warriors. They were fierce bowmen and horsemen. And for years, Mongol groups had attacked China, raiding towns and looting. Mongolia is a country today north of China, and many Mongols there still live like their nomadic ancestors. In 1206, a Mongolian named Temujin began uniting Mongol tribes for the first time. So instead of just these tribes fighting against each other, he united them together as a giant fighting force. He took the title of Genghis Khan, or universal ruler, and he's considered one of the most famous rulers in world history. With Mongols united, they tore across Asia, conquering everywhere they went. Because they were nomadic, Mongol warriors could easily move, attack, and then escape. Genghis Khan led campaigns of terror across Asia, creating one of the world's largest, by size, empires. His son, Ogadai, continued to conquer land and eventually took hold of northern China. But by 1300, the nomadic horsemen of Asia had conquered land from China all the way to Europe. And once again, this wasn't the largest empire the world had ever seen, but it was the largest by size, physical size. Genghis's grandson, Kublai Khan, eventually conquered southern China and united China under one Mongol government. He established a Mongol dynasty called the Yong dynasty and ruled China as a foreigner. So imagine now, China is united, but it's not united as a Chinese empire, but as a Mongol empire being ruled by a foreign power. Kublai's government was run by Mongols. Chinese were kept in small positions of power for fear that they would rebel against the Mongol rule. In the time period when the Mongols ruled China is known as the Mongol Ascendancy, this 300-year period. Marco Polo was an Italian trader who made an overland trek across the Silk Roads to China. He entered the court of Kublai Khan and worked for the government for over 17 years. He's one of the first Europeans to really be involved in China. Upon returning to Europe, Polo wrote a book about his travels and told stories about the wonderful items, inventions, and mysteries of the Asian continent. These stories led to an increased desire by Europeans to trade with China. So what makes Marco Polo a very famous person in history is that he made this very dangerous trip, him and his father and his uncle, across Asia. He works for Kublai Khan, this ruler of the Mongol Empire, for many years. Takes all these ideas and stories back with him. He publishes a book. Nobody believes him. Everyone thinks he's a liar. That the stuff he describes in his book. But what it did do, and it was a big seller, is it made a lot more Europeans interested in wanting to trade with Asia, which, as we're going to see in later parts of world history this year, is huge because Europeans are going to continue to want to find easier and safer ways to get to Asia to trade with places like China for their goods and products. Okay, so here are our chunk questions. Why were the Mongols successful in conquering China and most of Asia? And how did Marco Polo's journey impact world history? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our slideshow. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and email me. Have a good day.